Hey traders, welcome back to this week's weekly Forex forecast. We do have a couple of interest rate decisions next week out of Australia and also New Zealand on Wednesday. And the RBNZ are expected to cut 50 basis points. And New Zealand shorts are one of the top themes that I have on my watch list going into next week, and we're going to look at in today's video. Kicking off just first of all with the dollar index, you can see we are still at the 107.35. We did close down below it on a weekly basis, but look at the 20 moving average. We're just kind of doing nothing. We're correcting, we had a strong move, and now we're just pausing, consolidating. So as it currently stands, the dollar is really neither bullish nor bearish. It's actually bullish to neutral. And because we had such a strong down week, I would not be surprised to see this pushing down into its 20 moving average, the weekly 20 moving average, and then maybe even bouncing. So basically just having a nothing week. So going into this week, the US dollar pairs are not on the top of my watch list. We are going to be looking at euro dollar as we do every single week. But as you're going to see, one of the best themes coming into this week is in fact Japanese yen longs, especially if we're going to get the US dollar down a little bit more into its weekly 20 moving average next week. So JPY longs are on the top of my list coming into this week, and we're going to be looking at those in today's video amongst other things. Okay, so looking at the portfolio selection for the coming week, and two of the themes that jump out straight away that I like are Japanese yen to the long side, New Zealand dollar to the short side. Now, I'm personally looking for reversals. These are the trades that I take and that I send out to members in the GMT real-time setups. And the reason is because fading strategies, mean reversion strategies will outperform statistically in Forex because they're choppy markets. It's a choppy asset class. You don't tend to get directional moves unless you have big news events. Most of the time, Forex markets are just kind of chopping around. Now, that's relevant for next week because we do have that on Wednesday with the RBNZ. So what does that mean? It means really, if I am going to be looking at New Zealand shorts, which I am, then I want to be in and out of them before Wednesday, or I want to be kind of trading them after the RBNZ on Wednesday. And they might not actually do anything into Wednesday. When you have interest rate decisions, markets just tend to do nothing, and then you get the move, and you start to see the volatility afterwards. A bit like with CPI last week with the dollar. You know, not much happened, and then everything starts happening after Wednesday. So coming into this week, I do like those two themes. The Japanese yen long theme is a little bit personal for me this week. I really want to get something back on that because last week it was a winning week, and I think I've only had now, I think the last real losing week was about 19 weeks ago for me personally and in the members area with the real-time setups. 2 weeks ago, I was kind of break even, then ended up booking a final trade the following week, which just slightly tipped me negative. But aside from that, pretty much good run on a weekly basis, you know, up to kind of 18, 19 weeks. One of them was a non-week I didn't trade. And last week was another winning week in the books. But the Japanese yen long theme was one of my favorite themes last week. And we got post-CPI volatility. We started to get really good reversals from upper and lower bounds. In fact, with the yen, it's, you know, just upper bounds. Euro yen from its second upper bound. Aussie yen from its upper bound. New Zealand yen, really nice reversal from its upper bound. But I just couldn't quite catch them cleanly. You know, I was aware of it. I was looking to trade it. It was right at the top of my watch list. And I just couldn't quite get what I wanted to get out the Japanese yen pairs. So I ended up with a small profit on the Japanese yen long theme. But really, last week, I mean, that was a week could easily have walked away with a couple of big winners in the Japanese yen pairs. So I'm looking to get some of that back this week. I don't want a revenge trade, but I certainly want to try and maximize any returns this week because I feel like I missed out. Definitely left money on the table with the yen theme last week. So that's what I'm going to be looking for primarily coming into this week. We're also going to be looking at the Canadian dollar pairs. So in summary, you know, New Zealand yen to the downside, franc yen to the downside, euro yen to the downside. I'm also going to be looking at New Zealand CAD to the downside setups. I'm going to be looking at CAD franc to the upside, EurCad to the downside, which was a nice one last week. Looking to see if we can get that again this week. And also we're going to be looking at pound New Zealand to the upside, pound franc to the upside, and euro pound to the downside. You can maybe look at the Aussie, but I'll do it after the RBA. And, you know, primarily probably to the short side, you know, because we're going to get, by the looks of it, a rate cut next week. It's not my favorite theme. You know, certainly I think JPY longs and New Zealand dollar shorts are the better setups and the best plays next week in Forex. Kicking off the markets then with crude oil as we do every single week. And crude oil is a short. I mean, this is a market that I'm looking at to the short side. We did get a push higher in a reversal last week. So once again, if we can get crude oil coming up, taking out the 73.00, and I really like it when we have prior highs in this scenario, if I'm looking to be short something, right above the upper bound. So we enter the sell zone. Of course, to the other side, this is the buy zone. Why is this the sell zone, the buy zone? Because this is where we become oversold during the week. This is where we become overbought. This is where we become extremely overbought. In other words, once you breach this level, the odds of a reversing are even higher than from here. You know, roughly you could say 7 out of 10, roughly 9 out of 10 chance of reversing back inside the range. So range 1 and then range 2. And of course, you know, if we start to push into this already, I'm looking to see if I can capture a reversal to the downside, because now we're in a weak market and we're basically mispriced because we're heading into the sell zone, which means we've seen bullishness, we've seen strength. So I'm looking to the left here and I can see this high right here. This is going to be a really nice area, especially, again, always looking, well, most of the time I'm looking, you know, in the first half. So you could kind of draw a line right down the middle of this range. This high is a little bit too high because if we get to here, yes, that would be good, but we may be on our way to the second upper bound. But this would be a great opportunity. We start to push into the sell zone here and we take out this high. This is where I'm going to be looking potentially for a 1 or 2 day reversal to the downside in crude oil back inside the range. If we end up blasting all the way through, and I did this last week with Euro Yen, we blasted through on CPI. I was already short. I left it. In hindsight, I could have pulled that, but I thought, you know, if it goes and I pull it, then I'm going to miss out. If it moves against me, I can always risk manage it and add other positions. So I was short in Euro Yen, it blasted through, took out the second upper bound. I mean, it literally top ticked at the second upper bound. That's where my second order entry was. And that, as it pulled back, I scratched that for break even. If I held it, I could have had a bigger winner on Euro Yen, but usually we take out the second upper bound. I don't like to continue to stay into those. You know, that means the trade hasn't really worked, my first trade. I'd rather scratch it, you know, and look for something else. And so, you know, as soon as we take out a second upper bound or a second lower bound, I'm usually using that as a backup. You know, my first trade usually hasn't worked and I use it to exit the first position, usually for break even. Exactly what I did with Euro Yen in real time with members last week. So I would be looking, the second place, I'd be looking for a potential short is above the 75.43. Now, sometimes, you know, like last week you had CPI, you could have sidestepped the Euro Yen short from the upper bound, waited to CPI, it then went straight to its second upper bound, and then you could have had a really nice reversal. So that's one of the ways in which, because I got involved in Euro Yen before CPI, it meant that I didn't have that ability to just pull the trigger the first position from the second upper bound, and then I could have held it, and that would have been a big winner. So there's a good example of one trade that I took last week in real time, and because I just went in before CPI, I couldn't hold on to that without taking additional risk after it. So kind of missed out on that one. And then I shorted Franc Yen, which kind of reversed the least out of all of them. So, you know, it was that was the kind of week I had trying to trade the yen last week. So going into this week, those are the two setups that I'm going to be looking at. And the third and final thing is, if you start to break back above the moving average and you start to work to this first upper bound at 73.00, look for the breakout trade. You break back down below the moving average, pull back, and that first pullback into the moving average, you break above it, you pull back into it, you move away. That's the bear flag setup you can look for. And those setups work better on commodities because commodities are more volatile. So you can look at that to the downside into the sell zone, or in this case, profit taking target, the 68.13 next week. Okay, so kicking off the Forex markets with New Zealand yen. This was the sell-off last week. You see these two candles with these higher wicks? That was from the upper bound last week. And this sell-off, really nice sell-off, 1 to 2 days worth of volatility. In this case, I think this was just 1 day. You can see 4, 8, 12 hours. We're in the 4-hour chart, but you can get those for 2, sometimes even bigger reversals, 3 days or more. I'm looking to capture 1 to 2 days worth of movement out of 5. Bear in mind, we only get 5 trading days in a week. If I can pull out 1 or 2 of those in the week from a given pair, that's my goal, that's my objective. And very often you will get that from the upper and lower bounds. So a really nice sell-off last week. I didn't trade this. I wish I had traded it. If I wasn't asleep, you know, in the Asian session, I probably would have pulled the trigger on this, but unfortunately I had to just put my orders in on the ones that I wanted. It was Franc Yen, and Franc Yen ended up underperforming the other Japanese yen pairs with the reversals. So this kind of sell-off is what I'll be looking at this week. Maybe even, you know, this ×2, that would be great. So I'd like to see this pull back, take out the 88.61. We enter the sell zone, and to the left-hand side, there's a kind of a gap here, and there's a high over here. So this would be quite nice. So if we can push into here, hit this resistance and start to lack momentum, you know, I'm looking for the buyers to start to fatigue, to struggle. Then they pull their positions, and that's what causes right over here. You see that? You get this kind of weakness, and then you get the liquidation to the downside, and that is where you can get paid for 1 or 2 days to the downside next week in New Zealand yen. Just bear in mind the RBNZ on Wednesday, so I'm going to be looking at all the New Zealand pairs before Wednesday or after Wednesday, so just keep that in mind. The second thing you can look for is the 89.94. This is where we become extremely oversold during the week. You'd need some kind of catalyst. Now we do have the RBNZ, so it's possible you could see the New Zealand pairs going to second upper or lower bounds next week. So if we do come here, if I'm already short, I'd be looking to short again to cost average this position. If I'm not already short, that's the ideal setup, pushes into the second upper bound. This would be a great place on an initial position, maybe post RBNZ. So you kind of leave it, RBNZ comes out, it blasts into its second upper bound, and then you get the opportunity to short it from there. And the third and final thing, of course, is you can look for the breakout trade, especially if you get the RBNZ, the sell-off on the rate cut. You can look for that first pullback, bear flag into the profit taking target to the downside at the 85.96. Next is franc yen. Now this is the one I shorted last week, and look at the reversal compared to New Zealand yen. New Zealand yen just liquidated, Aussie yen just liquidated, even Euro yen from its second upper bound liquidated. Franc yen kind of held up. And we come in this morning, and again looking at the quantitative data in HedgeDash, it still is pointing towards a short or do nothing. Had I listened to HedgeDash last week with the New Zealand yen short instead of franc yen short, which was highlighted as a better trade, then I would have made money on that short instead of franc yen, which basically ended up just being a small winner. So I am going to stick with franc yen this week, even though last week we kind of struggled because it is quantitatively weak in the HedgeDash system. If we can push higher into the 17152, this is where I'm going to be looking for a potential short. Looking to the left-hand side, you know, this is the high that I would like to see. We're kind of almost halfway, but that would be good because if we take this out, we're now quite deep into the sell zone here in a market that should be going down. Doesn't mean it has to go down, you know, from the open next week. If it pushes higher, it means I'm looking for shorts. If it pushes higher, it means I'm looking for shorts. So it doesn't mean that it can't go up. What it means is if it does go up, reactively, I'm looking to be short. So that's what I'm going to be looking for in franc yen. If we blast through here for whatever reason, it's not expected, especially if we don't have a catalyst, I am going to be looking above the 173.72 at also a place to open up a short position. And this would be, if I'm already short, I'd be looking to cost average it from here. If I'm not, great initial position. And the third and final thing, of course, as always, if you start to get the breakdown back below the moving average with momentum, look for the pullback into the moving average, kind of hugs it, and then you get that sell-off. There's your bear flag down to the 167.11. And the final yen pair is Euro yen. Now, I can either be short or do nothing. Cannot buy this market next week. It's the same with all the yen pairs that we just looked at. What I'd like to see is, I'd like to see, and look at the sell-off last week from the second upper bound. This big sell-off here was right from the second upper bound. Just kind of top ticked it. And I think we looked at this in last week's weekly Forex Forecast video, so you can go and have a look at the levels. But it was right here. Ticked it, we got this wick, and then we sold off. What I'd like to see is the same again, but a push into the first upper bound. And to the left-hand side, I mean, we have some nice highs here in the 4 hours. One here, one here. So if we start to break up and we test these areas, this is where we start to get confluence with the odds turning in our favor in the sell zone, and we start to run into prior highs. So this is going to be a great place next week to look for a 1 or 2 day reversal. If we blast through, I'd be very surprised because we did it last week. Not often do you see a market go to its second upper bound and then to its second upper bound, especially when there's no real catalyst for it. So I don't anticipate at all this coming up to the 164.35, but if it does, it would be the second place. I'll be looking for a 1 or 2 day reversal, whether I'm short already or not. And the third and final thing is, you can look for the breakout again in Forex. The yen pairs, if you are going to breakout trade, are probably the best ones because they're more volatile. You can look for that bear flag set up into the profit taking target to the downside, in this case the 157.53. Moving on then to the CAD pairs, starting with New Zealand CAD. I can either be short this market or do nothing. It doesn't matter what happens with the RBNZ next week. I can only short this market or just leave it alone. So what I'd like to see is, I'd like to see New Zealand CAD pulling back, taking out the 0.8201. This is where we become oversold during the week. And we don't really have any highs over here. So this is where I'd be looking for reversal patterns to come in, start to see buyers lacking momentum, and then reversal patterns, standard reversal patterns, double top, head and shoulders, looking for this to bring a liquidation to the downside back inside the range. If we trade above the 0.8277, which is possible again because we have the RBNZ, so if we just kind of leave it, wait until the RBNZ because it's not moving, and then the RBNZ comes out and it pushes it into its second upper bound, then I would be looking, if I wasn't already involved for an initial position, if I was involved for a second position. And the third and final thing is, you start to push up, especially if you get the RBNZ on Wednesday. Again, you get the sell-off because of the rate cut and you get bearish rhetoric. Pull back into the moving average, move away, this time into the 0.8048. This is where we enter the profit taking zone. And we've got some nice lows here. The prior lows are kind of in it here. So when you see this, you know, it's like on the other side. It's a good short opportunity if you have highs over here, for example, above the upper bound. If you're booking profits, you can look for prior lows just inside the buy zone in this case, or the profit taking zone. Next is CAD Franc. I can either buy this market next week or do nothing. Selling is not an option for me. What I'd like to see is I'd like to see it come down, take out the 0.6315. And again, there's kind of nothing but air between the first lower bound and the second lower bound. So I would personally wait to see this comes down and then start to look for those bullish reversal patterns in this case, double bottom, inverse head and shoulders for a 1 or 2 day liquidation. If we blast all the way down and take out the 0.6288, this would be the second place, especially as we have a nice low sitting right here. This would be a very good place, especially for an initial position, for 1 or 2 day reversal back inside the range, in this case the bigger range here, the gold range. And the third and final thing is you can look for the pullback, and if you start to break back above it, so you're making your way down to the lower bound, and then you get the breakout back above the moving average tracks it, and you get that bull flag set up in this case back into the profit taking zone at the 0.63687. And the final CAD pair is EurCad. Now this was a really nice setup I took in real time with members last week. We pushed into the sell zone and look to the left here. There's a really nice high. So we started to trade above this prior high, this resistance area. And as we started to trade above it, I could see buyers were getting fatigued. We're starting to lack momentum. And I shorted it pretty much the top tick. In fact, the top tick was pretty much the upper bound last week. So we pushed above the resistance area and we pushed into the upper bound. And because in this case, we had already traded through the resistance area, as we hit that upper bound, we reversed immediately. And this sell off here to the downside, this was a really nice move and a setup from last week. So I'll be looking again for shorts, but this time, you know, I'd like to see this kind of march higher, push into the upper bound at the 1.50122. Again, you know, this prior high is kind of above midway. So I'll be looking here for exhaustion in and of itself instead of at prior resistance. If we take this out, okay, fine, that would be great, but it's quite deep into the sell zone. So I'd like to see it come up, start to double top, start to look for those head and shoulders patterns for a reversal back inside the range. If we blast through, not expected to happen, but if we do take out the 1.5141, this would be the second place. I'd be looking for a reversal to the downside next week. And the third and final thing is you can, if you want, look for that breakout intra-week. Moving average follows it. And that first pullback and the hug of the moving average, you can look for that bear flag down to the 1.4753. And again, we have nice prior lows just inside the profit taking zone here. So that would be a great profit taking target, these prior lows for any intra-week shorts next week in EurCad. Okay, so moving on to the pound pairs before we wrap up the video with euro, dollar, gold, and also silver. I really want to be long or doing nothing in pound New Zealand next week. So I'd like to see pound New Zealand coming down, taking out the lower bound at the 2.1753. This is where I'm going to start to look for potential long opportunities. Now, if we blast through here and we take out these lows, this would be a good place to look for support. This is not a particularly weak market. So if we start trading into support levels down here, there's a good chance that this holds. So I'm going to be looking for a 1 or 2 day reversal back inside the range if we get this next week. If we do start to break down, let's say we have the RBNZ coming out and, you know, they disappoint and we end up seeing strength in the New Zealand, it pushes it all the way down to the lower bound. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't expect it to happen, but if it does, reactively, that would be the second place I'd be looking for a potential 1 or 2 day reversal. And the third and final thing, of course, is especially with the RBNZ on Wednesday, if you come down like this and you get the break on Wednesday, look for this market to pull back into the moving average. You get that bull flag into the prior high and into the profit taking zone above the 2.2170. Next is pound franc. I can either be a buyer of this market or do nothing. Selling this market is not an option for me next week. So I'd like to see pound franc come down, breach the 1.1228. And if we can breach this and take out this prior low, and there's a high over here. So there's quite a nice area where we've got prior resistance, in this case, broken, turning support. And so this kind of, you can look at this almost as a buy zone within a buy zone down here. This would be a great place to start to look for a 1 or 2 day reversal back inside the range next week. If we end up all the way back down at the 1.1133, again, not expected. Last week we had US CPI, so the yen pairs, euro yen did go to its second upper bound because we had that catalyst affects the euro and the yen. But, there shouldn't really be any reason for pound franc to come down here. But if it does, reactively as a backup, this is where I'd be looking for 1 or 2 reversal. And the third and final thing is we start to make our way back down towards the lower bound and we get the break intra-week. The moving average follows it. You get that break with momentum. And that first pullback and test, sometimes it just hugs it, sells off, pulls back, hugs it, and then you get that, in this case, bear flag, in this case, bull flag, into the upper bound of the 1.1417. Great profit taking target next week for any pound franc longs. And the final pound pair is euro pound. I can either be short or do nothing. Buying this market's not an option. And I like this setup next week because we're chopping around. But if we can push higher and take out the upper bound, there's some really nice highs right here and also right here. This is where I'm going to be primarily looking. Can we pull back? And there's also a low right here. Can we pull back and start to enter this area, this high, this high, this low? And if we do, start to hit resistance. We start to see the buyers struggling, and then you get that liquidation back inside the range. So that's what I'm going to be looking for in euro pound next week. If it blasts through and ends up at the 0.8433, this is the second place I'll be looking for a 1 or 2 day reversal, whether I'm short already with a position or not. And the third and final thing is, breakout trading this market. Maybe it's not the best one, but if you get the momentum, if you really see a strong sell-off and the moving average follows it, especially as this is corrective, and you could break this with momentum just technically, then you can look for that bear flag setup into the moving average in the way down to the profit taking target of 0.8287. And wrapping up the Forex universe then with euro dollar. I think there are better markets to trade, but we look at euro dollar every single week. I do favor short setups in euro dollar. What I'd like to see then is, I'd like to see this pushing above the upper bound next week at the 1.0596. I would consider potential short opportunities back inside the range for a 1 or 2 day liquidation. If we end up, which I think is unlikely based on what we just looked at in the dollar index at the beginning of the video, if we do end up at the second upper bound, this would be unexpected, but it would be the second place I'd be looking for a short in this market. And the third and final thing is we start to double top maybe over here, and then you get the moving average coming up and you get the breakdown with momentum. And usually you only get one kind of bear flag or bull flag during the week, but that would be a good opportunity for a potential short down to the 1.03864. So really for me, I can either be short or do nothing with euro dollar next week based on the hedge-quantitative performance metrics. Buying this market is not an option for me next week. Okay, so finishing off with gold and silver. I am looking to the long side in both of them, but silver longs I'm not enamored with because we've had a kind of weak dollar and silver really has struggled even with a kind of weaker dollar. I have been highlighting gold longs to the upside as something I've been looking at and something interested in over the last number of weeks, since we've been kind of pulling back in the dollar. And I do favor gold longs once again over silver longs. So if we get a pullback in gold, I'd like to see this breach in the 282441. We trade into this high, and then we've got a nice support low right here in the 4 hours as well. This is going to be a great area to start to look for sellers to run out of steam, and then looking for that 1 or 2 day reversal back inside the range next week. If we end up at 2766.29, what does that mean? Probably the dollar has exploded for some reason, and we've had a liquidation in gold. I don't see that happening. I've been saying the same thing for a number of weeks here. Hasn't happened. I don't see it happening again next week. But if that were to happen, just as a kind of backup, that would be the second place I'd be looking for a 1 or 2 day reversal. And because we're now breaking down, this was the last time we broke down below the 20 moving average. Look at this time we broke down. Look at this time we broke down. If we start to break down, you can look for the break back above the moving average, pull back into it, move away. Pull back into it, here it's just one candle, move away. Pull back into it, pretty much just one candle in this case, moves away. So you can look for that bull flag setup, break above, moving average follows it, and you get that kind of bull flag setup into the prior highs. Really nice, sitting right here at the upper bound, the 2940.66. And last, and in this case least, it is silver, because I'm not really interested in trading silver next week. It's a neutral market, and the risk of trading silver to the long side is if the dollar does reverse, then silver is likely to go down stronger than gold. So I'd prefer to be involved in gold in that scenario. So if we do pull down to the 30.92, you could look. We do have prior highs right here, and we also have a support low right here. If we trade down and take this out, there is a case to be made. If we start to see sellers starting to struggle, to look for that 1 or 2 day liquidation. If you end up down at the second lower bound, again, maybe you'd have to see that dollar reversal, which I'm not expecting, but it is possible. Then that would be the second place I'd be looking for 1 or 2 day reversal. And again, you know, intra-week, honestly, if you really want, it is a commodity, you could look for the breakout, but I personally wouldn't bother breakout trading this next week. You know, I'd much rather trade gold to the upside, as I said, than silver. So that is it from me for today, guys. As always, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, why not consider joining us in the GMT training room each day, where I look at the best markets as well as sharing real-time setups that I'm personally looking at trading with members as part of our GMT training program. Don't forget, you can also get a 2-week free trial to the cutting-edge hedge-trading app used in today's video by heading over to www.hedge-.com. Access to the cutting-edge hedge-platform is included with every GMT membership.